number 3. I'm Manuel Pedagrakis. None of what I teach here is my own. I have gained this information from a wonderful Prosphoro baking group in Greece, directed by Mr. Kostas Tsaparas and Mrs. Evgenia. You can find their YouTube channel, Konstantinos Tsaparas, and you can join the Viber group called Kinotita Prosphoro if you wish. I simply have translated what they have taught, and I am offering that to you. Anything that is good is from them. Any mistakes are my own, so forgive me. Very quickly, I just wanted to say that what we are doing today is making bread, the holy bread offering, which becomes in the church the body of our Lord Jesus Christ. We are making bread, but when we stamp it with the holy seal, which bears the cross and which also bears the initials of the victory exclamation, Jesus Christ the victor, or as the winner, that then becomes a holy prosphoro, which is different to just plain bread. So everything we do in the preparation and the making of a prosphoro has to be done with a clean heart, a clean body and soul. We should be living the life of an Orthodox Christian. We should be going regularly to confession. We cannot really make this thing as an offering to God if we hate our sister and brother or have an enemy that we haven't reconciled to, just like when you go to accept communion. It's the same thing. So before anything else, we must have a scrupulously clean kitchen. We can't have the smell of last night's roast lamb come into the food. When we store our starter, it can't be in a fridge that's unclean and smells of onion and so forth. It's got to all be very clean. And the items, the seals, of course, the utensils that we use should, wherever possible, be solely used for the preparation of your prosphoro. It can't be done, it's best not to use them for all sorts of other things in the kitchen and then to put them aside and suddenly start making a prosphoro. It's best to keep everything for prosphoro in a box. I keep mine in this great big box, and whenever I'm ready to make a prosphoro, I clean the kitchen, I bring the box out. We should also be clean. They recommend that traditionally in Greece, the ladies nistevun, fasting that day, and they clean, they wash, they put clean clothes on, they make sure they cover their head, and this so that things like hair don't end up in the holy gift offering. So before anything else, we prepare ourselves in a proper prayerful mindset. That's the main thing. You can't really be doing prosphoro when you have guests coming over for a glendi and you be in the kitchen to do this, distracted from what you're doing. It's best to be done very early in the morning, obviously, where it's peaceful and quiet. So the first things we do is the prayers. And of course you can pray any way you want. Traditionally, when the prosphoro is being made, especially in monasteries, there are monks who are chanting the prayers. They are doing of course, the Brisagion first, the thrice holy hymns. But many of the times they are reading the Psalter or are doing the supplicatory canon to the Theotokos while they're making the prosphoro. We won't be doing all of that, but we would like to ask Father Panayoti to start with the Brisagion prayers. I'll go and light the incense. And traditionally we have a candle or a candili burning right here where we're making the prosphoro. So I'll get started with this. I'll go outside so it doesn't smoke the room up. Do we have fire alarm? It helps to use the box. It's right to match. Πάτερ.
Ευλογητός ο Θεός ημών πάντοτε νυν και αεί και στους αιώνας των αιώνων αμήν. Άγιος ο Θεός, Άγιος χειρός, Άγιος θα μας λέησον ημάς. Άγιος ο Θεός, Άγιος χειρός, Άγιος θα μας λέησον ημάς. Άγιος ο Θεός, Άγιος χειρός, Άγιος θα μας λέησον ημάς. Δόξα Πατρί και Υιό και Αγίο Πνεύματι και νυν και αεί και στους αιώνας των αμήν. Παναγία Τριάς, ελέησον ημάς, Κύριε ελάς της μαρτίας ημών, Δέσποτα συγχώρεσον της ανομίας ημών. Άγιε επίσκεψε και ίας τας ασθενείας ημών. Ένε και εν το όνοματό σου, Κύριε ελέησον, Κύριε ελέησον, Κύριε ελέησον. Δόξα Πατρί και Υιό και Αγίο Πνεύματι και νυν και αεί και στους αιώνας των αμήν. Πάτερ ημών εν τους ουρανείς, αγίως το όνομά σου, το βασιλεία σου, γεννηθήτω το θέλημά σου, ως στον ουρανό και επί της γης, των άптων ημών των επιούσεων, δώσει μην σήμερον και άφης μην τα οφειλήματα ημών, ως και εμείς αφήνουμε τους οφειλέτες ημών και εμείς ενέγγιση ημάς πειρασμών, αλλά ρίσε ημάς από του πονηρού, ότι σου εστίν η βασιλεία και η δύναμη και η δόξα, του Πατρός και του Υιού και του Αγίου Πνεύματος, νυν και αεί και εις τους αιώνας των αιώνων αμήν. Χριστέ το φως του αληθινών, το φωτίζουν και αγιάζουν πάντα άνθρωπον ερχόμενον στον κόσμο. Σημειωθεί το εφημάς το φως του προσώπου σου, είναι αυτό του σώμεθα φως του απρόσιτον, και κατεύθυνον τα διαβήματα ημών προς εργασία των εντολών σου. Πρεσβείες του αναχράντου σου μητρός και πάντων σου των Αγίων αμήν. Άξιον εστίν ως αληθώς μακαρίζειν σε την Θεοτόκον, την αημακάριστον και παναμόμητον και μητέρα του Θεού ημών, την τιμιωτέραν των χερουβίμ και ενδοξωτέραν ασυγκρίτως των Σεραφείμ, την αδιαφθόρος Θεών λόγων τεκούσαν, την όντως Θεοτόκον σε μεγαλύνομεν.
We sense our oven, our workplace, our sfragides, our containers, everything. I won't go into that. Each of you will develop your own practices. There are other prayers specifically for Prosphoro making that are on the website as well. You can find them online also. All right. So with the making of the Prosphoro, a few words about the ingredients that we use. We mentioned the utensils should be kept specifically for Prosphoro. Is there any way of cooling the air conditioning, making it cooler? Yes. So the flour. You probably have all read that I recommended organic flour, where possible white baker's flour. The reason is, organic means they haven't put chemicals in it or bleached it. It allows the prosimi, which we have made and nurtured organically, to thrive better when it's organic flour. There's a good chance that ordinary flours might work, but you will find better results with the organic flours. And we are really meant to offer our best to the church, to the Lord. The water, if we use straight tap water, what you'll find is the chlorine in the water will probably kill the prosimi and really make it very difficult for the Prosphoro to rise. So I generally just buy some spring water. Yes, if you would rather not, you can fill a large bowl with tap water from the night before and leave it open, covered so that it breathes and lets the chlorine evaporate. I haven't done that myself. I've always stuck to that, so I know that if something goes wrong, it's not the quality of the water that's responsible. I won't go in great depth about the starter other than to just touch on how we use it. That was another workshop. There's plenty of information on the website, and if any of you have specific questions about the starter, you can ask me and I'll let you know. Now, for anyone who doesn't have starter at home, I've brought plenty. I hope there'll be enough for each of you to take some home, and I'll tell you briefly how to feed it and keep it healthy and keep it alive. Because the prosimi, the naturally occurring starter that we have made, traditionally the starter of the basil, du basilico, is made with the blessed and holy basil that came from the elevation of the cross from the 14th of September, and we use it with special prayers and we develop the prosimi. But you can do what's called traditional paraskevi and basically make it if you don't have that, or borrow it from someone, and so on. So that's all right. We'll cover that separately and I'll give some to you. Now, this Before we go on, I should talk about what is the ideal prosphoro. What is our goal in the making of a prosphoro? Excuse me just a moment. The goal of making an offering is to have as best we can a beautiful offering. Dostoevsky said beauty will save the world, and what he meant was the beauty of the church, the beauty of God, the beauty of creation, and what we like to do is to offer that back to the world. So I've made one for tonight's liturgy. If I can get the plastic open, I'll show you. The ideal is to have a prosphoro which is not like the sourdough bread that you buy in the bakery full of big gas bubbles. Why do we not want big gas bubbles? Because when the priest cuts the amno, the lamb, from the middle, if there's a great big air bubble underneath, it's not able to be used. So we tend to use a dough. We develop a dough that has very low hydration. It's not a very wet dough, so that it becomes a more dense bread crumb. And we hope that it has a blemish-free surface, that it has a reasonable height, at least 3 or 4 fingers depth, especially when there's a large service. If there are plenty of people, the father is going to want to have a sizable amno. When it's just 3 or 4 people, when it's only 3 or 4 people, they are happier to accept a very small prosphoro, and that will be told to you by the priest. When you ask them, what kind of prosphoro do you want for the weekday service when there's only 4 of you, Father, he might say, I want a very small one. If it's a big feast day, they want big ones. So we want one without flour on it. We want one without big bubbles, preferably with a soft crust. We don't want crunchy brown crusts. And when we cut it, which I'm not going to do, this one will hopefully go for the service tonight, but when the priest cuts it, it is hopefully uniform, spongy, but not too soft and not too many air cells. And that's what a lot of what we do here will be, to develop that kind of crumb and crust. All right. And of course, we do all of this so that there are no impurities. And the flour that we use, we sift, if possible, twice before in a fine mesh, so that anything, insects or bits of sand or dirt, which can happen in good quality, don't go through it. All right? So we've spoken about prayer and cleanliness. Now, we've spoken about the ingredients briefly. The next thing that's important to understand is the proportions. As I mentioned to a few of the ladies here, if you use, if we use a tiny sfragiera for a very large pan, as it rises, often the sfragiera, the impression, will actually shrink and become too small to be used properly. If we use too large a sfragiera for the pan, you just can't exert the right pressure, you can't get a deep impression, it just doesn't work. And what's more, when it rises, if the impression is right at the edges, the dough slips down the side and gets lost, and the sides of it are lost. The impression is not whole. So it's best to have, if possible, 1 finger breadth of distance, at least, around the sfragiera. So try and get a sfragiera, or get pans that match your sfragiera. Okay? The other very important thing is the amount of flour that we use for the different sizes of pans. The reason being, it won't bake properly if it's too shallow or too high. Okay, so I have this on the website as well, prosphoro.com, PROSPHORO.com. All of these details, the proportions, are on the website. So for a pan, and I like these deep pans, because then when it's rising, if you need to handle the rising prosphoro, you're not risking bumping the surface and making marks and so forth. This makes it easier. Even when it's fully risen, it's not quite to the top, and it's more handy. So for this size pan, which is usually the common one, the 8-inch, or 20 centimetres, they recommend 800 grams of flour, and the general rule for baking prosphoro is half the weight of the flour as water. So, for 800 grams of flour, I've measured the flour out. For 800 grams of flour, I'm going to use 400 mils by weight. All right? Don't use those cups with the measurements. They're often very incorrect, of water. But because some flours are less thirsty and some flours are more thirsty, keep 20 or 30 mils behind in reserve until you see how your dough is. Okay? That way you can add a little bit at a time to get it a little, if it's too dry. How do we tell if the dough is too dry? You can't tell until after the first long rest. I'll show you in a minute. We mix the ingredients together and then we give it a long rest called autolysis. And in that rest, the water wets the flour, softens the proteins, and the whole thing becomes a lot more like dough that you can see. You can get an idea if the dough is dry or too wet. Okay? So, calculate for yourselves. If you're using 600 grams of flour, some of the ladies have got a smaller pan, 600 grams of flour, we need 300 mils or grams of water, but take away 20, so it'll be 280. For me, I'll be using 800, 400 mils of water, but I'll be using 380 and keeping 20 aside. The proportion of salt that we use, and there are some parts of Greece that think we shouldn't use salt, but most people think we should use the salt. It also helps the dough, it firms the network, and it gives a better taste. If there's some acidity or sourness to our starter and prosimi, it balances the sour. So for all of those reasons we use salt. It's about 1% of the weight of your flour. So for 800 grams of flour, I'm going to use how many grams of salt? 8. 8. If you use 600 grams, you use flour, 6 grams of salt, or a little bit less. So the salt that we use you should try not to use table salt, because in table salt they use other things to make it shakeable, like corn flour or other ingredients. Best to use cooking or lake salt or some of those fancy salts that they get without any additives, the flaked salt. I grind my salt so that there's not big chunks, because you want to make sure it all dissolves and goes. Now the easiest way to mix, what I'll do, I'll actually pull out some starter. Who has their own starter? How many of you have your own starter? Better still, how many of you will need some starter? 1, 2, 3, 4. I've got plenty. I've got 5. Plenty. So I fed this yesterday. The elastic band shows where it was when I had just fed it. I allowed it to rise halfway up to its height, and then I put it in the fridge. There is still plenty of food in that for the microbes, the yeasts and the bacteria to go. So that's how I do it. And I'm ready to bake straight from the fridge with this. There's no problem with that. How much starter do we use? Basically, with the weight of the flour, we take between 5 and 10%. I've been baking fairly successfully, consistently with 10%. So 10% of the 80 grams of flour, 800 grams of flour is 80 grams of starter. So that's what I'm going to use. But if I didn't have much, I could have used 40 and it would have been just fine. So between 40 and 80. In other words, between 5% and 10%. Okay? All right. So, the next step is to show you how to combine the ingredients. The easiest, there are many different ways to do it, but the easiest way is to combine the flour I fluff it up a bit, there's plenty of air, oxygen, food. Then I weigh the water. So I said 380.
600 flowers, how much water I put?
280 and 20 reserve. Be very accurate. You would be surprised. Even 5 mils difference can make your dough too wet or too dry. It's very, very accurate. So 10%. All right. So I've got the water measured. I make a little well in the shape of a cross.
Excuse me.
Yes?
You don't have to warm the water.
The himona, in the winter, it's not a bad idea to warm the water. In this weather, if you use even the tap water, sometimes you only have 1 hour before the dough becomes overdeveloped and flops. So I actually use a little bit of cold water because I'm going to be doing things step by step. It'll take longer. So I actually cool the water a little bit. But yes, generally speaking, room temperature water is fine, winter or summer. Here in Brisbane, it's not too bad. So, you pour the water in, if possible, in the shape of a cross, saying your Lord have mercies.
What is this? What is this?
What is it? Come and take the scales and measure out your 280. No, you can't do it like that. Put the scales on. Sorry, no, wait. You zero it. Okay, that's 0. Now, pour till you get to 280. It'll be about half of that bottle. So 192. Now this is my starter. I take the scales, and you can either use a bowl to put your starter in, or you can weigh the jar with your starter and then see how much comes off. So I'll do it this way. I want 80 grams, so that's about this plus a bit more. No, there was more. That's 88 grams there. So I have my 80 grams of starter. 800 grams of flour, most of the water, bar about 20 mils in here, and then we simply add the starter into the water. And what you'll notice, an active, vigorous starter floats. When you've been pressing it and stirring it here, sometimes the gas bubbles have popped out and it won't float straight away, but if you leave it 3 to 5 minutes, it comes up again. So that's one good way of knowing if your starter is vigorous. Pardon? Ναι, ένα λεπτό. Θα δείξω αυτό το μέρος και μετά θα κάνετε και εσείς. Now I'm just going to measure the salt. So we said βάζουμε και το αλάτι, we put in the salt, and then what's a good idea is to gently stir the water with the starter and get the starter mixed through that little lake of water. To make a sloppy mixture, and that then will be distributed through the flour more uniformly. And while you're doing this, you're saying your Kyrie eleison, Lord have mercy. Or you're listening to the recording of the prayers to the Theotokos. So I make a slurry like this, which then I mix with the rest of it. Okay? Όχι ακόμα. Then it's a good idea to use motions that come from the sides and lift up in the middle as you turn the bowl. Try and mix all the ingredients together, get all the dry flour mixed. You'll find it becomes what I call a raggedy mess very soon. Within a couple of minutes, you get this raggedy mess, this dusty, raggedy mess. I'll bring it round so you can all have a look. Alright, so that's here I wash, if I haven't already, wash your hands really well, and now we're going to start with the hands. Okay, so at this stage I simply make the sign of the cross over the mess of the raggedy mess. I usually get up a little higher because it's much easier to knead when you're a little bit higher, and you press down with your fists and then from the bottom up until you combine all the flour with the dough. one of the signs that you haven't enough water in your mixture is if it is impossible for your flour to mix in and become dough. If no matter how hard you try, there's some flour that just won't join on, you need that water, the extra water. Okay, so that's one of the signs. The best thing to do when you get a new flour, right, if you're just beginning, get 100 grams of that flour. Little packet. Get 100 grams of the flour. Start with 40 mils, less than half. Try and mix it and see if it mixes well. And if not, then you gradually add more. And if you need exactly 47 mils to get it just wet enough in combining that's how much you should for that flour. There'll be other flours that need 55 mils out of the 100. So that's 55%. Does that make sense? So if you do a little test run with just 100 grams of flour, but now I know these flours and I know it's about 50%. It's pretty close. Another note is that it's much easier to moisten up a dry dough than it is to dry down a dough that's too wet. Now, can you see? It's one dry, dusty, but it's just about taken up all the flour. Turn it round and round, you rub it on the edges. Alright, so that's about what we want. It's only just taken up all that flour, and that's pretty ideal. I imagine I'll be adding a little bit of water soon. But once you've got it to this level, we make a sphere out of it. So we lessen the surface area. Είναι σφιχτό. Αλλά θα δεις ότι θα μαλακώσει. And then what I do, in the olden days they would moisten a tea towel, and that's one thing you can do, a moist, damp tea towel, you put it over. Right. I find it's very convenient to use these ones and leave it for 20 to 30 minutes. Afterlysis. So we'll have a little break now and we'll get you all to combine your ingredients and we'll go to the next stage. Ναι, πολύ. Δεν θα βάλουμε μαγείς, θα βάλουμε προζύμι. Ναι, θα σας το δώσω αν δεν έχει.
Ωραία, δεν έχω.
Can we interrupt the... no? Alright. Αν βάλουμε ψαμοδία πάτε, πρέπει να είναι λίγο πιο χαμηλό, γιατί φοβάμαι δεν θα να πούμε.
Και δεν μιλάς τώρα.
Ωραία, δεν αξιολόγεις. Καλή ιδέα, μην μπράβο πάτε.
Θα δώσουμε χαιρετίσματα στην Αμερική, μας βλέπουν από την Αμερική. Είναι βράδυ, 11:30 ώρα, στο New Jersey.
Hello everybody from America and any other parts of the world. I can't believe this is being watched overseas. All right. Just for your information, if any details have slipped past you during this talk, you're welcome to visit the website, which has pretty much all the basics on the website in different pages. Prosphoro.com, Prosphoro.com, and hopefully you'll see the various directions and proportions and everything else you need there. Now, who needs a starter? Ποιος χρειάζεται προζύμι? Έχεις δηλαδή? How much is yours? 800? Prossimi? Questa va, l'ho messo io, non c'è più. Quella lì c'è una That's exactly reality. Have you got to hang on to do it? Όταν πάτε σπίτι, θα πάρετε αυτό και θα πάρετε 60 νερό, θα το ανακατέψετε καλά, να γίνει σαν ένα κιλό μέσα εδώ, είσαι πιο μεγάλο, ναι, θα χρειαστεί πιο μεγάλο, περίπου τέτοιο, γιατί θα το σκώσει. Θα πάρετε όλο όσο μπορείτε, 60 νερό, θα το ανακατέψετε, και μετά 60 γραμμάρια αλεύρι, θα το ξαναανακατέψετε και θα γίνει έτσι. Και θα το αφήσεις, ίσως πούμε ένα ελάχιστο, για να δεις, θα το αφήσεις κάπου ήσυχα, γιατί το ζελεύμα όχι το ξυλία, και σε 3-4 ώρες θα δεις ότι θα έχει διπλασιάσει. Πριν διπλασιάσει, κλείστο για να μην γυρίζει από το ξυλίο με λίγο πλάστη και βάφει στο ξυλίο. Δηλαδή θα μείνει εκεί και θα είναι ιερό και καλό για μία εβδομάδα. Εντάξει, αλλά την βραδιά πριν θέλεις να ξαναφτιάξεις πρόσφωρο, θα βγάλεις πάλι, ας πούμε 70-60 γραμμάρια και θα βάλεις πάλι λίγο παραπάνω νερό και αλεύρι να το αναπιάσεις, δηλαδή να το δώσεις ξαναπαιδιό. Και για να βάλεις στο προσφύγιο, καλύτερα πάλι να το κάνεις το ίδιο βάρος νερό με αλεύρι. Να είναι σε αυτή την υδάτωση, δεν θέλουμε πολύ τεκνό, συνήθως εδώ, και θέλουμε πολύ αραιό. Εντάξει, αυτό είναι το καλύτερο, ίσα τα βάλει τα νερό. Και αμέσως να το βάλεις και εντάξει. Εγώ θέλω, γιατί δεν θέλω να ξυνίζει καθόλου το πρόσφαρο, εγώ προτιμάω να το ταΐσω την βραδιά από πριν, να είναι φρέσκο και να μην και μέσα στο ψυγείο που κάθεται. Δουλεύουν τα μικρόδια και βάζουν οξύ. Είναι λίγο πιο ξινό το προζύμι, αν το έχεις ξεκουράσει για μια εβδομάδα. Έτσι, την βραδιά πριν ετοιμάσεις πρόσφορο, βγάλε και τάισε το και ανάπιασε το να είναι φρέσκο και μυζόντα, αν θες. Αλλά και από το ψυγείο γίνεται.
Πάντως για να κάνω το πρόσφορο θα χρειαστεί να μου μετρήσω
όπως είπαμε. Το 1/10 το βάρος του αλεύρι σου. Αυτό εξαρτάται από το ταψί και πόσο μόνο το. Εντάξει. cilindros que creaste o sacos. 28 inch, 20 centimeters. There you go. Let it red. Just cover it, so it doesn't dry. You all need a fraction more water. That's 5 mils. What sort of flour have you got? Yeah, beautiful. Now, I will leave that and we'll judge it after the 20 minutes of the process. So that was about 8 to 10 extra mils. Cover it up so it doesn't fall asleep. Cover it up and we'll prevent a skin forming on it.
Εμάς
Χρειάζεται προζύμι.
πρέπει να συνεχίσεις να μας πεις αν κάποιος δεν μπορεί να συνεχίσει, τα χέρια του πονάνε. Μπορεί να το βάλει στη μηχανή και πόσο.
Μπορεί.
Θες το εξήγησε το έτσι αναλυτικά, γιατί μπορεί να είναι κάποιος που δεν μπορεί να κάνει αυτό.
Those people who, for whatever reason, can't use their hands to make a prosphoro and prefer to use a machine, firstly let me say that the machine is going to really need to be a strong, sturdy machine because the dough that we use is not normal bread dough, it's much more dense. But if you have a machine like that, always remember you use far less in terms of time of kneading. So whereas I might knead for 5 to 10 minutes with by hand, you only need about 2 minutes, maybe 3 at the most, with the machine. If you feel the dough becoming warmer than your hands or the room temperature, it's getting too much energy, too much heat, and you will break the bonds of the proteins and destroy the dough. So you've got to be very vigilant. I haven't used the machine, so I'm not an expert. And every machine I'm sure is different. You use a very low, I'm told, you use a very low speed setting, really only just enough to get the ingredients mixed, and you continually check to make sure it's not getting too hot. So rarely more than 2 minutes at a time on the machine for the different kneading phases. That's about as much as I know about machine kneading. And what you'll see here is that a lot of the work isn't really a lot of vigorous hand kneading for many, many minutes. You do a lot of the work by letting the water act on the flour and do the work for you. So I hope that's of some help.
Στη μηχανή το βάζουμε στο γάτσο. Τι βάζουμε μέσα στη μηχανή.
There's usually, if you're using a machine, a bread dough machine, they usually have a dough attachment, which is like a curved finger almost. You don't need the fancy ones with lots of blades and so forth. Just, as I said, to mix the ingredients more than anything else. Does anybody else need prosimi? All right. Before you leave today, those who don't have their own prosimi, their own starter, I'll be giving you a small amount.
Okay.
Okay. To keep it healthy and alive, when you get it home, feed it. How do we feed it? You take 1 part by weight of starter, add 2 parts of the same weight water, this water, mix it with a clean fork until it becomes syrupy almost. Then add the same weight of the water in flour. So, if you have 50 grams of starter, you will put 100 mils of water, mix it up, then 100 grams of flour and mix it up. And then you let it rest with an elastic band at the level where the dough mixture has come. Why do we do that? So we can see when it rises, how quickly it rises, to prove its vigor to us. Okay? The microbes produce gas, and that gas raises the height. Before it gets to double the height, I usually wait till it gets to 50%, halfway to doubling its height. I cover it with some cling wrap, so as to stop the odours of the refrigerator getting into the prosimi, and I store it in the fridge. And that should remain vigorous and active for at least a week. But because the microbes continue to work in that starter, even while it's in the refrigerator, there will be some more acidity, some more acetic acid, sourness in that prosimi. So if you want your priest to say, that Prosphoro was delicious, it was hardly sour at all, it was beautiful and aromatic, and I didn't taste much sour, which is what we all want, feed it the day before you want to make your next Prosphoro. What do? If you've done what I said, 50 and 100 and 100, you've got 250 grams of starter. If you use all of that, you're going to have to use half a litre of water and half a kilo of flour. You're going to have, in 3 days, you're going to have 700 kilos of starter. You don't want to do that. You take 40 or 30 or 50 grams of starter. You either throw away the rest or put it in the compost, or make beautiful other recipes. If you Google, what do I do with my sourdough starter? There are hundreds of recipes what you can do with it. Or make home bread. Same thing as you're doing here, just add much more water and it becomes more bubbly and aerated. It's less dense and beautiful for home bread. But the day before, preferably the night before you're going to use your starter for the Prosphoro the next day, again, take, say, 50 grams, add 100 grams of water, mix it, 100 grams of flour, you've got plenty of prosimi fresh for that day's Prosphoro. Just work out for yourself. If you're going to make 4 Prosphoro this size, you're going to need 4 by 80 grams, which is 320 grams. So make sure you've got enough. If you're only making 1 itty-bitty little Prosphoro, you don't need to make a huge amount. Take a tablespoon, weigh it, and make the amount that you need. So let's not be too wasteful with it. You'll end up getting good at knowing how much to make and how much to store, etc. On the website, I've listed a whole range of things to look for. How do we test if our starter is healthy and good? For you people who are starting fresh, the best thing to do is to make some bread between your Prosphoro baking and watch that it rises your bread properly and vigorously. Eat the bread and taste it and make sure. Make Prosphoro as bread and taste it to make sure that it's to your liking, that it's subtle, tastes beautiful, not too sour, and has the right crust and crumb. And then when you're ready to make one for the church, you've got some more experience and you know what you're giving to the church. Okay?
Can I make small here when I make?
Yeah,
Be alright?
That's it. Just about, yeah, very good. Just a little bit of flour left. You just scrape the sides, press a little more. Oh, listo. Bravo. Perfect. This is actually very good. Δεν χρειάζεται. Θα τη δώσουμε τώρα να ξεκουραστεί και το νερό θα κάνει τη δουλειά με λίγους να κουράζεσαι εσύ. Σκέπασε το μόνο να μην κάνει δέρμα. Must be getting late in America by now. You folks got some caffeine ready? All right.
Ouch, sorry. Sorry about that.
All right. Yep. Coming just a moment. Just try and get it up the last bit by straightening it around. And then let it rest. How's everybody going? Have you got your lump resting now?
Yes.
You remembered how it felt before you finished? You'll get a great surprise after the rest because it feels totally different. Take note of the appearance, take note of the texture and the feel of the dough. When everyone's got theirs resting, I'll go to the next stage.
One question.
Yes?
How you make the starter without having other starter? Like,
It's a miracle. It truly is a miracle. We mix organic flour with water, with no chlorine in it. We say some prayers. We take the Basiliko from the elevation of the Holy Cross, 2 twigs. We place it on top in the shape of a cross. We say the Apolitikion for the elevation of the cross. Save, O God, your people and bless your inheritance. We close it not completely, but we rest the lid on top. And we put it somewhere warm, but not too hot, not too cold, without a draft. And we wait. 24 hours later, a few small bubbles. We take it, we remove the basil gently and put it aside. We take some of it again, mix fresh water, fresh flour with the mixture that we had. We replace the basil again, saying the prayer again the next day, and let it rest again. Then we do this daily. On the 3rd or 4th day, what happens is everything goes quiet. We think we've killed the starter. Everyone thinks, oh no, it's dead, I've got to throw it away. But what's happening then is that the unhelpful germs, the microbes, that work against the helpful ones are having a big battle. You've got to be patient, keep feeding it once every 24 hours. Yours may fail, sometimes it fails, it goes green or brown or grey, it has horrible colours, it smells funny, you've got to throw it away and start again. But most often, what happens is on the 5th day or so, usually 4th or 5th day, it starts coming alive. More bubbles, more activity, and then we recommend you feed it again daily for about another 3 or 4 days till it's very vigorous, till you see that the level of your starter doubles in this temperature of 25, 26 degrees room temperature. It should double within 4 to 6 hours. If it doubles in 4 to 6 hours, you know it's vigorous. Another way to test it is to get a bowl of water, scoop out 1 spoon of your starter, gently scrape it off. It may plop to the bottom, but in a few minutes it'll rise again. If it rises or floats straight from the beginning, you know it's active. Then you can keep it in the fridge and just feed it once a week. We recommend that before you try making Prosphoro, you try making home bread first to make sure that it's vigorous and raises your bread.
If you have no Basiliko, how you make the starter?
Τότε φτιάχνεις παραδοσιακό. Το ίδιο τρόπο, λες και τις προσευχές αμαρτές.
Μου είπανε εφτάζιμο.
Ναι, αυτό είναι άλλο.
Τι κάνουμε, εφτάζιμο δηλαδή. For 7 days, I do whatever you said, that much water, that much flavor, for 7 days. But I tried, but not success.
Το εφτάζιμο ξέρω μόνο αυτές τις κουλούρες που φτιάχνουν στην Ελλάδα που έχουν σισάμι γύρω-γύρω και είναι από αλεύρι του G.O.P, πώς λέγεται. Ρεβίθια, από ρεβίθια. Αυτό είναι εφτάζιμο. Το κριτικό δεν λέτε.
Το κριτικό.
Είναι για άλλα πράγματα. Εμείς κάνουμε τώρα προτείνει για πρόσφορο.
Αλλά δεν κάνουμε το με τα ρεβίθια.
Όχι.
Με τα αλεύρι. Τα αλεύρι.
Alright, next stage. Everybody ready? Their lumps covered. Alright. I'm going to take my watch and ring off now. Yeah, that's fine. Have you got some dampness on your tea towel? I'll give it a rinse to it. Yeah, rinse. Yeah, that's right. All right, so we've got the dough. It's been resting for 20 minutes to half an hour. When we start to work on it, we realise it's much softer. Look at that, I couldn't press it before. There was no way I could press it at all before. Now, it's like plasticine, like a soft plasticine. Kyria Evgenia in Greece told me probably the most useful thing she said about the quality of the dough at this stage is that it shouldn't be soft like your earlobe. It should be firm like the muscles at the base of your thumb. Okay, so fairly firm is what we want.
In that case, you didn't use all the water.
Well, it depends. My amount of water, holding back the 20 mils, looks perfect now. But I will also get some clues the more I work the dough. So the best way to work the dough is to get up a little higher so you can use the weight of your body and with straight elbows so you don't get tired.
You can't use water now, it's too light. Is that right?
You can.
You can.
Slowly. If it's too dry, I'll show you. But I'm going to work it for a few minutes, just a few minutes. Some rolling, some turning, and some pressing as you roll. Okay? Now, as I'm working, I'm noticing the quality of the dough. What I'm looking for, if the dough sticks to my hand, it's far too wet. Far too wet. You better start adding a little bit of flour at a time, and remember your proportions. Keeping a baking record, like a journal of your bakes, right, is so important because you forget these things. You know, I used 300 and how many mils did I use that time? You've forgotten. You know that it was too wet and you've forgotten how much water you used. So the next time you're experimenting again. So keep a record of everything you're going to use. And as you're baking, you make the notes and adjust and keep those records. And the ones that are failures, you ask yourself what was wrong, and the next time you adjust the variables to get it right. And then when you've got it right, and they're working most times, you know you're on the winning proportions and recipes. So you don't have to do the job again and again and again. Now, did you notice how rough the mass was only minutes ago? How much kneading have I done? Next to none. Look at that. The water has done most of the work for you. I'll knead it a few more minutes. It feels really lovely and smooth already. One of the other things I look for, as I'm doing this, as I'm folding the folds over, if the folds just do not blend in, see how the fold has blended here? If they just refuse to blend in, they're keeping separate, and as I'm pushing the dough, it splits at the edges, it's too dry. So how do we moisten it up? What I do is I have a spray gun, I weigh how much water is in there. I know that this spray gun actually squirts about 1 mil every time it squirts, like that. But to be even more accurate, I weigh it before I start adding water, so that at the end, if I've added 7 mils by sprayer, I can add it to my notes and say, this time I needed this much water. Alternatively, you can put a bowl with water, weigh it, just dip the back of your hand, rub it gently over the dough, and then work it in. It works in and it likes taking extra water. And then you weigh it at the end of how many times you've used it, so you don't have to keep track more laborious. So this, it's joining up quite nicely. It's not keeping apart. Yeah, it's starting to just peel apart without joining itself. See how it's doing that? So I'm going to just add 280. Can someone remember that for me? 280. Another good way of kneading is to flatten it out with your fist and then fold. Flatten and then fold. You might be tempted to use, 10 and 20 mils at a time. I guarantee you 4 and 5 mils can make all the difference. It can go from too dry to too sticky with only, 5 or 10 mils extra. So already I have a dough. It's not any longer a rough mass like you've left. Okay? You can see the quality of the dough. When we cut it, it's fairly smooth, but there are still some bubbles and irregularities, maybe some patches of dry flour still. But that's not bad for this early stage with a minimum amount of kneading. So, that's where we're at. And we give it another rest for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. If we're tired, we have a break. Say some prayers. All right. And whenever you're resting it, spheres have less surface area than this. That can dry quicker than a sphere. So make it into the shape of a sphere, sign of the cross, and rest it. Now, if you're wondering, geez, it's still a bit too dry, we're going to have 2 or 3 more kneading sessions. You can add a little bit of water again as we go. All right, your turn. Take note of the consistency of the dough.
Mine is not really
Yeah.
It doesn't
You
matter.
You can't get set.
Oh, there. A little bit rosto olivo. Ancora vivo per l'olio. Come si soleva Roma? A me curare.
Αύριο δηλαδή, Μανώλη, θα έχουμε 10 πρόσφορα.
Δεν θα το έχετε αύριο, πάτε. Γιατί αν τελειώσουμε σήμερα, πες 4 η ώρα, 4:30, σε αυτή τη θερμοκρασία, μέχρι που να ανέβει με προζύμι, θα είναι 6 ώρες παραπάνω. Εκτός και αν τους αρέσει να...
Και τι θα το κάνουμε μετά?
Θα πρέπει να το φυλάξουμε. Αν δεν θέλετε να ψήνετε τα μεσάνυχτα απόψε, μόλις πάτε σπίτι, θα το βάλετε έτσι σκεπασμένο και με μια πιτσέτα πάνω και σακούλα γύρω στο ψυγείο, στη συντήρηση, όχι στην κατάψυξη. Αύριο πρωί, εξαρτάται πότε μπορείτε να
Αλλά
ψήσετε.
έχουμε εκκλησία αύριο, να έρθουμε στην εκκλησία, Μανώλη.
Ναι, θα το βγάλετε πριν πάτε εκκλησία, πριν έρθετε εκκλησία. Και σιγά σιγά μόνο θα μείνει έξω, θα ανεβαίνει, 6-8 ώρες μετά.
Θα πιούμε καφέ πρώτα εδώ και μετά.
So I'll say that in English. What is that?
80 hours wanted to get to rise.
Alright. The dough, once we're finished and we're ready to let it rise, it rises depending on what factors? Temperature, like any reaction. And of course, how many microbes, good microbes, we've put in. So if we use 15% starter to the weight, it'll take a little bit less. If we use only 5% starter, it'll take a little bit longer than if we use 10%. I've been baking at 10% of the starter, of the flour weight at the start. And I found in this temperature here in Brisbane at the moment, 25, 26 degrees room temperature, it takes a good 6 hours to rise fully. In the winter, in Brisbane, when the room temperature is around 19 to 21, it can take 11 or 12 hours.
11, 12 hours.
Yep. So, That's very difficult to always be checking what we do, what I do anyway. There's different ways to do it. Some people use electric blankets. Other people use this turned upside down with a hot water bottle on top. I have an oven that's fairly airtight. I put it in with one of these over the top. With one of these in the oven. Again, that's one of the reasons I want a tall lid. Yeah, because if it rises and touches the plastic, it's going to melt. And then I boil up a half a cup of boiled water. I put it in a small bowl in the oven, and I leave it in there. It usually goes to 26, 28 degrees, and it rises much quicker. Okay? But we'll cover that again before the end of the day. Now,
How long you put it in the oven and oven
to rise?
No, to cook.
To cook.
Yeah.
That's okay. We'll cover the baking at the end. Rather than confuse people now with information, well, let's deal with this for now. And I'll come around if you don't mind and just have a little look at your dough as you go. Okay? All right. That's good. Yeah. See how it's not coming together? Yes, just a little bit of water. Use my spray. Just use 2 or 3 at a time. Fold. It's lovely. Believe it. Right. Yes. Believe it. Look. See this? What is that? Το άγγιξα και το έβρισα στο χέρι μου. Αυτό εννοεί είναι πολύ υδατωμένο, πολύ παραυδατωμένο. Τώρα, βάλε λίγο αλεύρι, λίγο και βγάζω αυτό το διάλειμμα. Βάζω, να σας δείξω και απλώσετε το όσο μπορείτε και λίγο αλεύρι, λίγο κάτω τώρα. Δεν νομίζω να πρέπει να ανεβεί και μετά να το ψήσετε και μετά να το...
Θα το αφήσω από 8 ώρες να ανεβεί.
Από 6 μέχρι 7 ώρες μάλλον. Εξαρτάται και πώς...
Να μην τρέχω δηλαδή να το βλέπω, να ξέρω.
Πόσο ζεστό είναι, πόσο ζεστό.
Είμαι ανίστηση πάντοτε τα θέματα και τα λίγο.
Ωραία. Ας το τώρα να δούμε πώς θα είναι σε 5 λεπτά. Γιατί θέλει την ξεκούραση του να σου δείξει αν είναι εντάξει.
Το παρακούρασα.
You probably need some floor for a new It's not too late. We can sit it up for a bit of a rest too.
Can we have the slide,
So this is one of the ladies. Her flour is all stone ground flour, and it's much thirstier than the combination of flours we've been using. So we've just added a bit of water to it.
You're using different ones than the last time,
It's okay. But I didn't add enough water to start with. I did add 380.
I think next time, just keep 10 minutes. Try that. You can tell yourself. You didn't read it. You didn't even need to do that one. You can tell. So you just simply add water, but not all at once. I would add this much now, and let it rest. See how well it softens. See how much harder this will work? Possibly.
Yeah. Then you start to do it. You want this dish to put it in or not?
I don't have it.
Or you don't?
Good. Let's leave that covered for a little while. That's really good from here. Then you have a look.
You're the professional.
This hasn't been done to you. Wrap it up, cover it, and move on to the next stage. All right, everybody. Leave your dough to rest for 5 minutes, and we'll go to the next step.
5 minutes.
Can everybody see? If you find any impurities in your flour, even though you've just take it out, throw it away. Try not to sweat. Yeah, is the air conditioning on?
Yep,
Thank you.
18 degrees.
We make the sign of the cross, and we need some more exactly like we did before. And we can see, first thing you notice is that, again, your dough is much softer than you remembered leaving it. But that only lasts for a few moments. When you start kneading, it firms up again. And that's exactly what we want. And at this stage, we make sure that the edges still can come together and that it's not sticking on our hands. So that's about the right consistency. I'm going to test the texture. It might be just a shade dry, so I'll add 1 or 2 squirts. Fold it. You'll find it's much smoother with fewer holes. There's still some there.
Got some.
Sure.
There's a
There are
large
holes.
ones there.
So, just another minute, and then I'll put it down for another rest. See how it's not coming together? What's it telling me? A little bit more water. Makes a huge difference when you're up a bit higher. This is much harder than what I experience at home on my little stool. So make sure you're at the right height, or else it's much harder than it needs to be. All right, your turn again. In the summer we can't do this too often. It'll break down and go too soft. So you probably will only do 2 or 3 knees before we do the next stage, which I'll show you. Nice, isn't it? Two or 3 more squirts. Sis, λίγο στεγνό, 2-3 αυτό, ναι, απλώς έτω και δίπλα μέτω. Έτσι, πώς πήγε αυτό? Είναι πολύ καλύτερα. Δεν κολλάει τόσο πολύ, αλλά είναι πολύ μαλακό. Θα σου προκαλέσει φουσκαλίτσες. Λίγο παραπάνω αλεύρι.
My mother, she was very nice.
Να σας πω, όταν φτιάχνει και 4 ή 6, είναι πολύ κουραστικό. Δήμωσε και λίγο ακόμη και μετά ας πούμε ξεκουραστικό. Και λίγο πιο στεγνό να είναι, θα είναι εντάξει.
Θα το κάνω.
Θα το κάνει. Σω.
Και το πρωί όταν τα φορά, για έξω πώς ψήφικα. 8 ώρες. Αν το κάθεσαι στη λίγη θα με αυξήσεις. Καλό, αλλά αυτό το κάθεσαι θα το βάζεις στο ψυγείο ως λιγούρι κλείς στο ψυγείο. Και θα το φορτίσεις το πρωί, θα το ξαναδημάσεις και θα το κάνεις στο ταψί, θα το βάζεις και δίπλα. Όχι, αυτό θα το κάνω δεν μπορείς να το κάνω και πάλι. Τότε θα το βάζεις στο ψυγείο. Όταν θα το πεις στο φούρνο, πάτε έξω. Είναι δηλαδή στην αστασία.
Going to the next section. All right.
Έλα Μαρία, τι κάνεις αυτό?
Λοιπόν, θα βάλουμε μπροστά πάλι.
Okay, next stage. When you're all ready, I'll go on to the next part. All right. You ready, ladies? We give it a gentle knead. Just another minute or two. Wait till it gets firm and loses that softness that it gets after resting for a minute or two. I have my sprayer, please?
Just spray with the water.
Thank you. Now by this stage, yes, we'll have to do, it'll be all right. Yes. Now, what I do, I make it the shape of a rod, an oblong, and cut it roughly in half. Check that there's even fewer bubbles. There's fewer of the small ones, some big ones there because I've only just folded it over. But what I want to do now, I cover the other half and I make this a rod shape, piece of dough. We get the rolling pin and we gently flatten it out. Why do we use the rolling pin? Well, first of all, let me say you don't have to. You can just do another session of kneading. But the group in Greece have found that by flattening to about 0.5 centimetre in thickness, and then folding and refolding, and then rolling again, gives it the best mechanics that we want for the dough to rise the way we want it. What you're doing with kneading any bread dough, but especially Prosphoro bread dough, is you're strengthening the protein matrix and giving it the qualities that we require for the bread dough, for the dough that we're making, to be able to keep its shape as it's rising, to keep the impression of the sprayera without stretching out, and that is greatly contributed to by the quality of your kneading. Like I said, you don't have to use this. You can just do another rolling kneading with your hands. And I've done that and they've worked out okay. But whenever I use this, I find that it rises better, the sprayera is clearer, everything seems to work better. So we flatten it out to about 0.5 centimetre, not too thin, you don't want to destroy the protein. And then I get a pin or a needle. Anywhere that you see bubbles, you just burst them. We don't want them to stay in the dough. Fold it up. In thirds. And fold it again. Put that aside, cover it maybe so it doesn't get dehydrated. And do the same thing with the other half. Burst the bubbles. Fold it in thirds. And roll it out. Then I put them all together. This is the beginning of the shaping part, where we're giving it the shape. So, just fold one corner over and press it in, and keep doing that as you turn the dough around. You all seen that? You bring the edges towards the center and then press down. And what that does is it stretches the surface underneath, the surface that will ultimately be the surface that takes the sprayera. So you do that a couple of times around, and then you gather up the edges. Are you watching? Gather up the edges and roll the smooth surface, the surface that we're going to stamp. Roll it 30 or 40, maybe 50 times.
15 or 50?
50. Lazy bones. Now this next bit's pretty important. Try and get this next bit right. So you've rolled it quite a few times. What we've got is a smooth side and loose ends side. Try and gather up the loose ends and bring them together, turning the dough as you go. And in the Greek group they call this making the achlavi, making a pair. So you just bring the dough to the top. You can see that the edges don't want to come together too readily because it's not that wet a dough. So we give it a little spray at the top, and then we keep going, the smooth side underneath, the rough side at the top, until the rough edges are pretty much joined together, and then you can make like a shape like that. What I do then is I get the slightly smaller pan, slightly smaller than the pan that I'm going to use. You don't have to, you can use the pan that you're going to use, but I use it one size smaller. I flour it lightly. I just use my breath and a bit of flour to get a very thin.
But if you put wax, you don't have to put a flour, do you?
Yeah, it's best to use the flour. So we've all waxed our upside. If you haven't waxed it, I'll wax it for you now before we get started. So I've got a very thin coat, just with my breath, of flour. We put this smooth side down, sprayera side down, in the center, and then I press and flatten it out like that, and press it into the corners. What we're doing is we're using the pan as a mold to shape a perfectly round, flat dough, ready for the sprayera, for the seal, for the impression. So that's what I've ended up with. It's not perfectly joined up, but those little cracks, those little joins don't matter. What I do now is gently pull from the edges with my fingers as I rotate. I gently pull away from the edges, and I move it so that it loosens, and I have a beautifully shaped Prosphoro dough that I dust, get all that flour off the surface. It's the smooth neck underneath, because we want this side to be perfect. Remember, we want to stamp it. And with gentle caressing motion, you rub the flour off, or you get a soft brush and brush off the excess flour from the surface. What I do now is I bend it up a little bit. Can you see that big bubble?
Yeah.
If I leave it there, it's going to destroy the amno. So I get the finest needle I've got, and I press it down the side and gently flatten out that bubble. And I look for any other bubbles, do the same. Oops. No more bubbles there at the moment. So we've got the nice shape that we want. What we like to do next, you don't have to, sprinkle a bit of flour in a line and roll the wheel so you get some flour around the edges, and rub that in the edges a few times round to strengthen the sides so it's less likely to split as it rises in the baking. But again, underneath is all right to get flour, but we don't like too much flour on the surface. Now this is ready for stamping. What I do, you can either put it in the tapsi, in the baking pan ready for stamping, but I prefer to let it rest at least 10 minutes, up to 20. Cover it over so it doesn't dry out too much.
You're a specialist.
And I check the time. 10 to 20 minutes rest. That rest is essential. Why? You know how the dough gets soft when it's rested for a while? That's when it's going to take the sprayita beautifully. And because our dough is fairly dry, we don't have to put flour on like that. Many of the places say you've got to use. You should never get dough sticking to your sprayita if you do it like this. Okay? Let's see how you go with the shaping next. All right. Shouldn't if you do it like this with this recipe. I've never had even one piece of dough stick to my sprayita yet. Looks like it. I'm going to wax one of these pens to just show you how it's done in case some of you haven't seen it. I'll show you. Whoever needs their pan wax, bring it to me now. Is better to enough. Shouldn't be rocket science, I'll just try and light this. Yeah, you know how to light this. Which one is this? I've got a video of how to do that on my website, how to wax your pans. So if you can't see it here, or you can see the video, that's fine, that's all I need. Alright. Έχουμε το ταψί μας, το ταψί. Alright, so I have a piece of beeswax. If you don't have any and you can't find any at the shops, one of those lovely beeswax candles, you just chop an inch or something.
It has to be
Pure beeswax, yeah, not paraffin.
No.
Alright, so you've got your clean pan, you put it on, you get hot, you get a kitchen towel, fold it over a few times. And before it gets too hot, you can see all the beeswax melting on there. It's about half a teaspoon there. You just rub it in, and the sides. So it doesn't stick. We don't use oil. We don't use oil, no. Okay, the beeswax. Yes. When it cools down, you'll find a very thin film. You can hardly see it, but it doesn't need much. So that's it. Whose is this one? Still hot. That's more. Now, when you've baked and you've taken your Prosphoro out, and there's little crumbs and flour that's cooked into the wax, you don't wash it with soap and water. You just get your paper towels, you put, imagine this one has just baked. I get the pan, I put a little more wax in, there. And then, with a clean paper towel again, you rub it hard and all the dry crusts come off onto the paper. You throw that one, you get another one, until most of them are gone, and then whatever wax is left on there is enough for the next bake. So you shouldn't have to wash it with detergents and so forth. You're only using these for Prosphoro anyway, so there's no other foods going in. And there it is. All right. I don't think it will take wax.
No wax.
It resists the wax because it's non-stick. It's yours, yes, no? Anybody else with a wax? Let's have a look. Just getting some more water in this particular dough because it's a stone ground flour and it's much thirstier than the rest of your flours. Δεν είναι το δικό σας, γιατί θα πείσει τα θεματάκια. Ορίστε. Το κάνουμε.
Εγώ το έστειξα με το πλαστικό. Και το δίνησα καλά.
Τώρα, θα θέλεις να το κάνεις δύσκολο.
Ναι, ναι. Να το τελειώσω γιατί εγώ δεν έχω το παράγω στο πλαστικό. Και εσείς εδώ.
Ναι. Ναι. Μπράβο.
Δεν είναι σπίτσιο.
Δεν είναι καλό.
Dai, vediamo il cielo funzionante come faccio fare domani. Bravo Maria. Se ne posso parlare bene in Davino. Bravo.
Because I'm more working market, we got about 5 maybe 10 more bills in there. That's more? Εδώ το smooth, το βάζουμε κάτω και το πιέζουμε και φέρνει το σχέδιο συνταξιού. Κάτι ματράκι. Σύρουμε έτσι. Το ξεκουράζεις τώρα σκεπασμένο με 10 λεπτά του λάθος. Θες να το βάλω μέσα να ξεκουραστεί. Δεν χρειάζεται, βάλω το πάστο. Or under a damp tea towel. There we go, baby.
Να περιμένω τον εναρμητό στη σφραγίνα. Να το πάμε. Δεν μου αρέσει να μην κάνω τσίπα.
Alright, next slide, Miss Nicola. Same thing now, everybody.
What's the electric one?
Και το βάζετε σε κρύο φούρνο και μετά το ανοίγετε. Μην το ζεστάνετε πρώτα. Άστε το να ζεσταθεί πιο φυσικά. Alright, so we're going to do the stamping stage now. We've let the Prosphoro rest, we've shaped it, we've let it rest. It's got soft. What I do next, I check the surface, make sure it's lovely and smooth, and I rub it until it gets a glaze on it, so it's really, really smooth. We want this surface to be as close to perfect as possible. I turn it over. Next, I use a pen or a needle, and I put some holes not all the way through, halfway down, so that as it bakes, air and gas can escape. Then I turn it over. My 8-inch pan is nearly ready. I've just got to dust it with flour. So once more, I'll dust it. And I place it in. I get it exactly in the center, because if your dough is all on one side and you stamp it as it rises, it will be lopsided. So if you try and stamp exactly in the middle, I like to give it a very few, very fine holes on the top surface, and the stamping makes them go invisible. So just a few, only under where the stamp impression will be. In the shape of a cross while you say your prayers. Then you get the stamp. Jesus Christos at the top. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Amen. The Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Amen. You've got to make sure it's right in the centre, remember, otherwise we get lopsided Prosphoro. Then some people use the palm of their hand, the base of their hand in the middle of the spraida, but I find that it's easy for the spraida to go off. So I use my thumb and the first two fingers, and I press down so that it's in the middle. And then I turn it a bit and press, turn and press. That way not one part is going to be high and the other part low. And you keep pressing until the top part of your spraida, your seal, is roughly the same height as the dough that comes up around the sides. Don't sink it any deeper, and if you haven't gone about that deep, about 1 centimetre to 1.5 centimetres in, it's not deep enough. Now you notice we didn't use flour on the surface. With this consistency of dough and the rest, it should not stick to your spraida. In case any particles do stick, because these are expensive and hard to get from Mount Athos, I have a clean brush and I just make sure that nothing's there. But I so far haven't had to use this. Now, I stamp deeply enough. There it is, you can see it's in the centre. It's uniform. We don't need to let it rest in there. I hold one hand on the edge of the pan, and with the other hand I gently pull up as I rotate, just a little bit at a time. And if you feel it starting to come away but only on one side, don't rip it off, because then it'll damage the impression. If you, it popped off very easily. Usually it does very easily. And you get a lovely stamp impression, which I'll bring around and show to the camera. No problem. Alright? Now I'll show you, while I'm doing this, I'll show you the piercing. Why do we pierce the dough? Firstly, let me say, we don't have to. The ideal thing is to leave the spraida without any marks. But almost always the gases that develop in the dough will cause a bubble if we don't pierce it and give it a route to escape. So what we do is we get a sharp stick, a skewer. In some parts of Greece they use a little stick of basilico, and I've shaped it into a stick. And we say our prayers while we pierce. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on your world. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on all your people. We are all the work of your hands and call upon your name. Lord Jesus Christ, have mercy on the sinners. Over here where the Theotokos impression is, Peragia Theotokos Kepimas, Peragia Theotokos Sosomimas. Over here are the ranks of angels, the fathers and the ancestors of God, etc. We pray to them to pray for us. Over here we pray for our family and our parish, and we're all Orthodox. And down the bottom we usually pray that the Lord gives rest to all those who have fallen asleep in the hope of resurrection unto life eternal. That's ready now to rest for the next 6 or 8 hours till it's come to the top. And I'll talk about what to look for. How do you know it's fully matured before you bake? Let's do that part now. Όταν είναι έτοιμο το βάζω στο φούρνο, το ανάβω, το βάζω στα 160 και σε 10 λεπτά έχει φτάσει στο δερμοστάσιο και έχει φτάσει πιο απλά, δεν είναι απότομο από κρύωση ζεστό να κάνει λόγο μέσα. How are you going, girls? Okay, just for this time. I'll be there in 1 minute.
Εγώ το θάλασσα να μόλι. Έβαλα το δαχτυλό μου μέσα. Άρα να μου δείτε τι
Και σου φτιάξει και ξανά. Άστο 5 λεπτά.
With the flower.
Καλό είναι, στη μέση με. Στη μέση. Θα βάλει στη μέση. Ωραία, σε το χρόνο.
Την επανεγγύα αστεία,
Δεν κούραστε εσείς Πάμε!
Γυρνάτο. Ξανά. Μπράβο, ξαναγύρισε εδώ. Ξανά. Μου φρύτει. Θα το κάνω λίγο παραπάνω. Βάστα την μια μεριά και τράβα λίγο σιγά σιγά απ' την άλλη γυρίζοντας το ταψάκι. Τώρα θα βγει ο πενά. Ορίστε. La πρώτη φορά, δεύτερη φορά, μια χαρά είναι.
Δεν έκανα πρώτη φορά που κάνω εδώ, δουλεύω.
Oh, yes, students.
Το έβαλες στο βίντεο μας, το κλείνει ή δεν είναι. Έβαλες λέγερα από το πάνω.
Έβαλα τη ώρα ή σε δύο. So you start up. So αυτό είναι το μπρουζίνι. Ναι. So τι έβαλες δηλαδή?
Έβαλα 50 γραμμς, 50 γραμμς νερό.
Okay. So
50 γραμμς.
έβαλες 50 grams νερό. Το ίδιο.
50 νερό. Αλλά είχα στάρτα, είχα προζύμι από πριν. Και βάζω τα άλλα 50. Γιατί άμα έβαλα μέσα 50 και 100 και 120 είναι μέσα. Ναι, και να αρχίσω εγώ από την αρχή. Ναι, γιατί όμως δεν μπορεί να δώσει. Δεν είχα κάποιο νερό. Θα βάλω 50 νερό και θα το ανακατέψω στα μάτια και θα βάλεις ένα λάστιχο εκεί μέσα στη σκόρση. Explain nothing better with the water.
The other ladies have left.
I have no idea what happened. Come on!
Now we're going to talk
Anybody
about
there?
orimasi, maturation, the rise, and the baking. I'll just wait till the other two ladies are ready.
Okay.
Okay, everybody?
So I hear you get to give them fish or
Now, the rise. When you take this home, like I said, from my experience in this temperature, this weather, it's a bit rainy today, so I'm not sure it might take a bit longer, but it will take at least 6, maybe 7 hours to rise fully. In the winter it takes longer in room temperature, in the summer it takes a bit less, sometimes 3.5 to 4 hours. Anyway, so you've got to protect the surface from drying out too much. So if you just leave it like that, you'll have a hard crust and it'll start to split as it dries. So you keep it covered. I like to hurry it along a little bit. The ideal temperature for the rise to happen, because you see at different temperatures you favor different microbes. If it's really cold or really hot, you favor the acid-producing germs, and that's okay, the microbes, but you'll have a more tangy bread. The best temperature is around 25 to 28, 29. 26 centigrade is the best. Alright, so what I do is like this, covered like this. I put it in my oven, close the door. I get a mug or a bowl, a ceramic bowl with boiling water, pour it in and put it inside, and I have a digital thermometer, room thermometer. It's actually got a humidity, what's it called, a hygrometer on it as well. So it tells me the humidity and it tells me the temperature. And by doing that, putting that and a cup or bowl of boiled water in the oven, and it's a fairly sealed up, fairly good oven, it keeps about 28 degrees for hours. Sometimes every 2 hours I have to boil up another bit of water, just to keep it warm and humid again. Even if this comes off in there, because it's humid, it's not going to dry out too much. And you check it. The first 2 hours it looks like nothing happens. Halfway through the rise, the impression of the stamp, which is lower than the surrounding donut, is about level. Many people think, oh, it's ready. What you need to do is to wait, if possible, to see that the area of the stamp actually juts up above the surrounding dough about 0.5 centimetre to 1 centimetre. Okay? It doesn't always do that, but generally it comes up, it stays level, and you think, oh, I better bake. And generally, by that time, it's double the height.
That's what happened with me. I feel like it was ready.
So at double the height, you're close. You need to keep an eye on it. From double the height onwards, every 15 minutes, have a look at it. Then look for, as I said, the slayida area, the area of the impression, to come up a little higher than the surrounding dough. Another useful test is the finger press test. Right? On the edge somewhere, away from the impression of the seal, gently depress the dough with a dry finger, about 0.5 centimetre in, wait 2 seconds and take your finger away. If it fills up almost within 2 or 3 seconds, it's not ready yet.
Okay.
If it stays sunken down and doesn't even begin to come up, it's past. Bake quickly. Alright? What you should aim for is when you press and then release, it starts to come up, but it looks like it's not going to make it. And you think, oh my goodness, I've left a pit in the edge of my dough. It's come up maybe 1/3 or half the way, but it struggles to come up the rest of the way. If you've done that, it's double the height, and the impression is higher than the surrounding, you're ready. Okay? Now, you may not get it perfect, but that's close. Then, you take carefully, because if you knock it at that time, it can deflate, like a souffle. So very carefully, I put my oven, which is an electric oven. Most ovens are electric now, okay? Most electric modern ovens have a fan-forced setting, all right? Yours all do? Many also have what they call traditional or bake setting, which is the element on the bottom and the element on the top with no fan force. Okay? That's a very good setting as well. So if you use the traditional top and bottom, you'll need about 180 degrees for your bake. If you're using fan force, 160 centigrade. But I put this into a cold oven. I put it in, I have a bowl of freshly heated boiled water in the bottom to let some humidity, okay, so that any stretching that happens, it's not too dry, so it keeps the surface supple, not too much, but just, like I said, a small half a cup down the bottom of your oven. Remembering, if you're using traditional bake, your oven directions will say you can only bake on one level. Okay, if you've got one here and one there, and you're doing top and bottom, some parts will be cooked, others won't. The beauty of the fan force is it generally cooks more uniformly all over, but it's not perfect. No oven is perfect, and I would rotate throughout the bake once or twice so that it gets even heat. Okay? So let's say we're using the fan force, and if we're doing 3 or 4 Prosphoro, you'll need to use fan force so that the whole oven cavity can cook. But remember, the fan force, also being that it uses hot air fan, dries the surface pretty quickly. So that's why I put the water in there at the beginning. Now, when you first put your Prosphoro in the oven and you switch it on, it's not hot straight away. It goes over 10-15 minutes, it reaches its 160 degrees, right? During that time, any gases that are trapped under the surface are going to form bubbles. You can actually see it. I look every couple of minutes. In the first 10 minutes, I watch. And any bubbles that start coming up, like golf balls underneath, I gently, I have my needle and a soft, very soft brush handy. I gently prick the bubble on the side, away from the unnost if I can, and gently press it down, not too much or you'll form a big depression, just enough to come level, and then put it back in and pray that it doesn't. And if you've given it a very thin route for the gas to escape, it'll come out and the whole thing will be all right. If you leave it go too far and it hardens, it's going to stay there as a bubble. And the priest will use it maybe as ambivalent, which is all right. But if you can watch it for the first 10 minutes, especially for the first few bakes, you'll get an idea. Now, you put it in there, you've watched it, 10 minutes have gone, no bubbles have happened, or if you've had a bubble, prick it gently. At about the 30-minute mark, it'll start to go a little bit rosy on top. Instead of being ivory colour, it'll start to go a little bit pink. All right? I call it the rosy. At that point, if you let it keep baking uncovered, the top will become too dark and the inside will be less cooked. So you've got to cover it. The best way to cover it is with aluminium foil or another similar shaped and sized pan directly over the top, resting on the other one. Or, if you can't do any of those, a pair of these just folded and put on, and then you put it back in. Even that will stop the top getting too baked. For my oven, and I think most modern electric ovens, they're fairly close to accurate 160 degrees. My Prosphoro, almost irrespective of what size and weight, take 1 hour and 40 minutes. Okay. So you can bake straight into a hot oven, but what you do is you cause the gases to expand quickly, and there's more chance of tearing or the bubbles coming up before you have a chance to prick them. So into a cold oven and watch and wait until it comes to that point where you can, and then cover it after the 30-minute mark. I generally check it half an hour after I've covered it, and then another half hour after that, which is almost perfect. Now, how do you tell if it's baked? Does anybody know? How do you tell if your bread is baked? Exactly. You have to take it out, have your oven mitts or a couple of tea towels ready. When the Prosphoro is cooked, generally it shrinks away from the pan. It's come away. Okay? So you can move it around. So you gently tip it over, remembering not to damage the either side. I have a folded couple of tea towels ready, and I rest it on there. And then on the back, either with a spoon or your finger, tap, tap, tap. If it sounds like a dull thump, thump, it's not ready. And it also often looks too pale. Okay? So you pop it back in, cover the top again, and put it back in the oven another 10-15 minutes, and check again. Try not to make the Prosphoro chocolate brown.
No. Yes.
Try not to make them come out paler than skin colour. They need to be just rosy, sort of like a lovely rich honey colour is better than chocolate brown and crusty and hard or too pale. All right. Now, when it's baked and you're confident that it's baked, you take it out, and one of the tea towels that only used for Prosphoro, you wrap it all the way around, and then I have a woolen blanket, and you wrap it in the woolen
Put
blanket.
it in a plastic.
No plastic yet.
No.
No plastic. Some of the water needs to escape, otherwise it'll be soggy. So, but the woolen and the tea towel give it just enough evaporation, and if you leave it in overnight or for at least 6 hours, it gives you a crust which is elastic and soft and not crunchy and brittle, and that's what you want. So let's say you've prepared it and you let it rest. Early that morning you get up for church if it's done the day before, and it's perfect and ready for church. You wrap it gently, either in the clean tea towel or in a clean white, not coloured because the colours can come off, kitchen paper towels, and then put it in the lovely white linen or cotton pillowcase that represents the shroud that we bury Christ in, with the cross or the embroidery on it if you've got one of those. If not, you put it in a clean plastic bag and take it early to the church. Now, often we can't bake the day before or the Friday ready for the Saturday for Sunday morning. So what do we do if we haven't got the opportunity to bake? Firstly, you know that this one here that I've got prepared now, if this is to rise, it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon. If it takes 7 hours, it's 10 o'clock. I don't feel like baking at midnight.
No.
So I'm going to put this in the fridge as soon as I get home. Take it out first thing in the morning. By lunchtime or mid-afternoon, it's ready for the
How
bake.
many hours after? Still you have to wait?
Well, because you've cooled it, it needs to come to room temperature. It'll maybe take 40 minutes or an hour longer. It might take 8 hours instead of 6. Yes.
How do you store it in the fridge for baking?
What I do is exactly this, but after I put one layer of dampened heater, like this, with this over the top, in a plastic bag over the top of that, and in the fridge.
Okay.
Then, and that's because I don't want too much moisture and condensation dripping on the surface.
Okay.
So I don't put just the plastic directly on it. This should absorb if there's too much. And the couple of little sprays that I dampen this with will keep it moist.
Okay.
It also keeps itself moist because it's wet underneath. So it keeps the surface. Only if there's a breeze and you don't cover it, within 10 minutes it's got a dry skin and it starts to crack. If that happens, very fine mist, very little, not enough to pool the water. If you put enough to pool the water, especially just as you bake, what happens is the little dips have water and that dough is wet, and the peaks at the top are dry. And because you've got dough that have different hydration levels, as it bakes, it splits. All right. So that's how you store it in the fridge. The next day you take everything off and you just put that back on and you put it somewhere. Now remember, if I put this on a stone granite bench, the granite's going to keep the bottom cold. You need to give it a bit of space, put it on a, what do you call it? Wood or cork or something like that to let it all come to the room temperature together. So that's that. Now, if we've made our Prosphoro on a Tuesday and you want to take it to Sunday liturgy, it's going to be a little bit stale, even though sourdough bread lasts far better than yeasty bread, but you want it to be as fresh as possible. So you do the same thing again, put it in the fridge for 2 hours, and then put it in the freezer until 24 hours before you're ready to take it to church. You put it in the fridge again for 2 or 3 hours, and then back on your cork or wood, covered like just with your paper and plastic bag. And your baked Prosphoro should, over 8 to 10 hours, come back to room temperature, and the next morning you take it to church. It's usually all right. If there are problems, Father will tell you what he's noticed, if anything at all.
Excuse me.
Yes.
When you take it from the oven,
Yes.
that it's ready, did you say you wrap it up?
Yes, in the clean tea towel that
Yeah.
you use only for Prosphoro,
Yeah. While
Wrap
it's
it.
hot. While it's hot.
while it's hot, and then I put it in the blanket, and I cover it with the woolen blanket that I only use for Prosphoro, and I put it on a scatter so that it can, I put it once on my varnished timber desk table, and the heat and the moisture cause the acrylic varnish to bubble. So be careful where you leave a hot bread, it can damage a timber surface.
And you take it out of the dish, of course.
Oh yeah, out of the dish, wrapped in the tea towel, wrapped in the blanket, and let it cool very slowly. It's not the end of the world if you only leave it in this,
Yeah.
but it will probably form a harder, crispier crust than what the priest likes.
Right.
I think that covers most of the things. Try not to stab your Prosphoro to test it. It is better to do trial Prosphoro and taste them and cut them and eat them yourself a few times before you're ready to take them to church, or do 2 at the same time, cut one up and eat it, and you'll know what the other one's like if you bake them the same way. And if it's delicious, it's soft and cooked and everything ready, you know the one for church can go to church. You eat one and you offer the other.
Okay.
All right. Any more questions?
Thank you very much.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. May God bless your Prosphoro making effort.
Για να πούμε και εμείς στην κάμερα τώρα, επειδή την είχε ο Εμμάνουελ όλη τη μέρα, να σας ευχαριστήσω πάρα πολύ που ήρθε σήμερα για ακόμα μια φορά και έδειξε αυτή την ιερή τέχνη, γιατί πρέπει η παράδοση να μείνει σε όλους και όλοι πρέπει να μάθουμε να φτιάχνουμε πρόσφορα. Θα σου ζητήσουμε να έρθεις άλλη μια φορά που θα είναι μόνο τα παιδιά του Youth. Για να κάνουμε ένα μάθημα, να μάθουν και όλοι οι μικροί πώς θα έχουμε το πρόσφορο. Σε ευχαριστούμε γιατί σε λίγες μέρες θα ξεκινήσει το 40 λίτρο και έτσι θα έχουμε πολλούς πια που θα μπορούν να φτιάξουν και έτσι δεν θα επιβαρυνθούν ένα ή δύο ο κόμπο αυτό. Άρα κάντε practice μέχρι τότε, καλό, για να μπορούμε να φτιάξουμε και να έχουμε να λειτουργούμε το Θεό μας έτσι όπως πρέπει, όπως λέει η παράδοση, και να χρησιμοποιούμε όλα όσα έχουμε παραλάβει από τις προηγούμενες γενιές.
Θέλω να ευχαριστήσω τον κύριο Κώστα Τσαχάρα και την κυρία Ευγενία στην Ελλάδα.
Βέβαια, ο Κώστας ήταν ενορίτης μου, στην ωραία που ήμουν και εγώ, ένας εξαιρετικός άνθρωπος, και η Ευγενία ίσως και αν την έχω γνωρίσει, αλλά τώρα δεν μπορώ να καταλάβω. Τον ευχαριστούμε λοιπόν από την Αυστραλία και να είναι ο άνθρωπος καλά και να μας δείξει και άλλα καινούργια. Να είστε καλά όλοι.
Ευχαριστώ.